It's September, and the Pittsburgh Pirates had an August that a lot of us would like to forget. Let's recap it on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day. My name is Ethan Smith, and as usual, every Monday, I have Gary Morgan beside me to discuss everything in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates as it pertains to us as lifelong fans, two lifelong fans just like you. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now. Go bet on some stuff. I was about a point shy of making $630. Thank you, Miami and Florida, for nothing. Appreciate that. But, you know, if you want to have fun like I do on FanDuel and not lose all your money, then go on FanDuel.com today and tell them that Locked On sent you. Also, happy Labor Day to everybody. Hopefully everybody had a very good long weekend. Obviously, you guys see new additions to the background. There will be new additions probably coming through the pipe as the offseason approaches. And Gary, I also realized it when I was setting my show up today that next Monday will be the 800th episode of Locked On Pirates. So 800, a lot of shows here on this podcast that I like to call home. But we're going to discuss August today. See, there was a lot of good in there. I had to rope everybody in. There was a lot of good in there first. And then when I mentioned the month of August, I feel like a lot of Pirates fans are just going to cringe immediately that we have to recap this month, which me and Gary do this all the time. We recap every month of the season. We have different takes about the team every month of the season because really and truthfully, baseball is a month-to-month kind of game. I mean, it really matters what you do over the course of a month instead of what you do every day. Very quickly, they did lose the series to the Cleveland Guardians over the weekend. Weird series. Cleveland's a good team. I think they have somewhat of a shot in the postseason, but I don't know if they have the horses pitching-wise to really get it done down there. So we'll see what they do. If you had to describe the month of August, though, for the Pittsburgh Pirates, Gary, in one word, what would it be? Let's start there.
Can I cheat and use two? Reality check.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a reality check. They learned very quickly how far away from playoff contenders they really are by directly getting their butts handed to them by playoff contenders. And I think for the most part, I think we learned that eventually pitching runs out of gas if you're not careful. Yep. I think that's what we've witnessed this month in particular.
Yeah, and if I had to say one word for it, it would probably be putrid. I mean, you look at this month, and a month ago today, I mean, we were talking about Brian De La Cruz and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Jalen Beeks and Nick York and Billy Cook and all the additions they made at the deadline, and thinking in our head, okay, well, here we go. And Gary, it stuck in my head throughout that entire 10-game stretch, what you said to me on this show before that stretch started, that was their opportunity to prove it. They had a direct opportunity against teams ahead of them to go in that stretch and win those games. And we'll go back to that stretch for a minute because a lot of people, including me, will look back at that stretch and get a little frustrated because there were a lot of those games during that 10-game stretch that they should have won. I mean, you could look at David Bednar and Colin Holderman having their blow-ups in the bullpen. David Bednar has since been taken out of the closer role. And you can look really just at the entire bullpen just having a terrible month. And then there were some days where the offense was scoring runs a lot more this month, it felt like. But there were also those days where they just wouldn't show up when they had to against teams like the Padres and the Diamondbacks. And you look at, and I like that you mentioned that too, because I want to talk about this more with you about kind of the distance that the Pirates have between these teams. Like, it doesn't feel like it's a crazy distance. Record-wise, it is. But when you really go back and look at the games, again, you could have seen 5-5 in that stretch in those 10 games. And nobody I don't think would really call you crazy for saying that. Now that's still you're still talking about a decent gap if you're 5-5, especially with what's happened afterwards. But what are we really the bad? I mean, what was the worst thing that happened all month? I mean, it has to be the bullpen, I would assume, right?
I mean, the bullpen was where the disease made itself apparent. You know what I mean? I mean, if you were to employ like Dr. House, you might have figured out what was going on before it hit that catastrophic, you know, sickness. You might have been able to actually cure it. But I mean, the bullpen seemed like a strength. It really felt like it had come together enough that you felt good about it. And during that stretch of winning a bunch of games on the way up to the All-Star break, it was the feature. Throughout this season, one aspect of this team has let them down at all points. You know, even the offense that we're saying was better over the last month. They only scored 113 runs. That's good for 21st in baseball. So
Yeah.
And the thing is, with the Pirates, that's better. That's better than it's been this year. And so an awful lot of the season, the offense let them down. The offense has kept them in games and actually made it more frustrating because they're now losing games that they were in the lead, like entering the late innings. They're coming back in games because the offense is participating enough to make them close instead of just being blowouts. So in some ways, it's more frustrating, but it's been something different all year, Ethan. It's been something different at a different point all year long.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people would want to hear this either. And I know a lot of the smoke is going to go towards the bullpen. The starting pitching also has not been what it's been all year either, like over this past month. And you mentioned that earlier about your pitching getting gassed out a little bit. Paul Skeens has still been really good. I mean, he's still been very good for what he's been able to do. But this month, he was not what we'd seen. Mitch Keller, for instance, as well, was having very iffy starts a lot. Luis Ortiz was having a multitude of problems early in games and then would eventually settle in. And Bailey Falter was just getting back from injury and kind of just doing Bailey Falter things. And then you were waiting, excuse me, on Jared Jones to come back. And he eventually comes back and, you know, he does okay as well. But it didn't really feel like it was the same dominant starting pitching staff that we've seen all season over the past 30 days.
Yeah, it feels to me like, and this is probably something that I'm just being a total fan about here. I have no insight on this at all, but there's something to me, I think, when you start trying to artificially stretch guys out and make sure that they have 5 full days in between starts, and you're juggling the rotation all the time and throwing in some guy who isn't normally in the rotation to get an extra spot and push guys back and changing plans, you know, 4 days into a rotation. Oh, Paul, you're actually going to go this day instead. I'm sorry. Here's an extra day for you. That rest is going to be great, pal. Well, starting pitchers especially are creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. And I just think the more they've pissed with it, the more I think we've seen these guys struggle and look like their routines aren't in order, and their velocity maybe takes them a couple innings to start really catching up to them. Maybe their sharpness isn't quite as good as it was. Like, to me, that's all cause and effect for trying to stretch out a couple guys. They feel like they're stretching out all of them. All 6 of the rotation members are getting pushed around and moved, and they're messing with things. And then they're not being backed by a good bullpen. So the extra pressure of, we've got to be perfect. Well, you're not going to be. And it's blowing up in their faces. And I don't know. To me, that all goes back to management.
Yeah. And I further that point too, of like the creatures of habit thing. I mean, that's with any aspect in life, not even just as a baseball player, as any aspect in life is like, okay, well, if you have a Monday through Friday job and suddenly your job says, hey, you don't need to work Friday, but you have to work Saturday. Like, you're not going to be happy about that. Like, that's going to be something like, cool, I get Friday off, but then I have to give up my Saturday. Like, that's not really all that great. And that's kind of where I feel like with this is even Paul Skeens, a lot of people will go back to his LSU days and say, well, he had a lot of rest in between starts. But the thing was, in those starts, they were the same day every single week. He pitched every Saturday. That is what he was doing.
They're letting him go max effort the entire time.
Yeah.
And again, we want to keep this guy's arm healthy. I don't want to pretend that I know the answer to how to do that. I'm sure the Pirates don't want to pretend they have the answer to do that.
I don't think anybody does.
But you certainly do what you think is best. Okay. I find it's valuable that they're trying to get them through the season. It's valuable that they want them to end the year. It's valuable they're letting them stretch out their innings this year. So hopefully you don't have to do it next year. But a guy like Mitch Keller in particular, he's been stretched out. And playing all these games, what you're actually doing is preventing him from hitting his 200 inning mark that he wanted to hit this year, and throwing off his rhythm. A guy that just cannot tolerate change of any kind, doesn't even like his catchers changing.
Yeah,
it isn't even about like him thinking Grandal's great. He just doesn't want the catcher to change. He doesn't care. He wants the same guy every time he goes out. I think there's a lot of things that I think they've done in the name of trying to do the right thing that have had ramifications elsewhere on the roster, and it took them too long to notice, if they even care now.
Yeah, and I mean, now you're 10 games under 500 going into this final month. So anybody in my comments section that said, well, they're not mathematically eliminated, well, they might as well be. I mean, at this point, they might as well be. It's kind of like talking about the Steelers in years past when, if they win their last 3 and then the other teams lose their last 3, then we're going to get – just don't even think about that anymore. Think about what this team is going into next year. I think that's what a lot of people are going to realize. We're going to talk about that a lot later in the expectations for the final month, but me and Gary are actually going to find some of the good stuff that happened in August, including Oneil Cruz. We'll discuss that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You heard me mention FanDuel earlier, so head to FanDuel.com right now because it is America's #1 sportsbook. And we have something a little different for you with FanDuel now because through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And they're always, always having promotions. Over this weekend with college football, I got my hands on 4 different promotions that ended up doubling my money over the weekend. And those promotions go from college football to the NFL to still baseball. You can do the same game parlay and get a 50% profit boost on a same game parlay on baseball. So if betting is your thing and you want to go have fun with it, then go to FanDuel.com and visit America's #1 sportsbook today. And folks, don't forget, after you make Locked On Pirates your first listen of the day on noon every Monday, make sure that you then go check out Locked On MLB with Paul Francis Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, as he's bringing you all of your news in Major League Baseball as October approaches. I mean, the way this year is moving, playoff baseball is going to be right around the corner, and as Pirates fans, we're going to have to pick our allegiances elsewhere, but that's okay. Gary, I know a lot of people are going to listen to this show and be like, wait, are they seriously going to try to find something good about what happened this month? And yes, we are, because that's what we do. We don't just talk crap about this team for 30 minutes and then call it a day. So I'll let you start on stuff that you thought was good. I feel like a lot of our answers might be the same because it really wasn't a lot in my eyes, but it was enough to say it was good.
Yeah, I think Oneil Cruz is the obvious. He's really been killing it last 30 games, batting 339. What's really kind of popped up, I think, the most for him is he's starting to take his walks. That's always a great sign with Oneil Cruz, because once he's taken his walks, it means he's being a little more selective. He's forcing the pitchers into the zone. 12 walks, 37 strikeouts in that past 30 games. That's good stuff, man. On base percentage of 403, slugging of 496. Everything about him has been great. Here's the thing. The only thing, he is not hitting as many home runs. And that's fine, because I think eventually those exit velocities will turn into home runs. I am more than happy with what he's doing right now. I'd like to see a little bit more havoc being wreaked by him on the base paths when he is getting on, though, because I think he can do that. And, the center field thing, we'll see how positive that winds out being. But I think all in all, attitude-wise, seems like he's embraced it, which is not what, some locals wanted to make us believe immediately. But, yeah, all in all, Oneil Cruz is the most positive thing. Couple things in the bullpen. Dennis Santana, I think, has kind of become a guy that you can look to maybe keep for next year. That's not a bad addition. Kyle Nicholas has still been relatively positive. I know he had one bad outing there, but that's been, a little bit of a nice story all year. I think he's been fairly consistent. And Aroldis Chapman has been incredible this past month.
Yeah.
So,
and going back to Oneil Cruz as well, to make a joke, he didn't sprint out to center field during warm-up, so he obviously doesn't want to play the position. So we'll just throw that out there. Interestingly enough, I remember at the beginning of the season, we were talking about power being a big element of this team, and Oneil Cruz was obviously a part of that. He's 2 home runs away from a 2020 season, folks. And he recently got his 20th stolen base. He's at 68 RBIs. The OPS is a 799. He's doing really well. And I think this is kind of what we were hoping for out of Oneil Cruz, is to see him kind of take that next step forward and become kind of that guy on this team. And I mean, you even look at where he's at now, he's 8 OPS points shy of Brian Reynolds.
yeah.
That's how good he's been. I mean, he's had a very good run of things. And I think one of the more impressive things that I've seen is earlier this year, Gary, we remember when lefties were pitching that Oneil Cruz was basically a non-factor. Like, you would not hit him against the lefty at all. It could be a big moment in the 8th inning of a game, and if Oneil Cruz is coming up, they're going to throw a lefty, and it's either going to be a strikeout or you're going to pinch hit for him. Now, you, as an opposing team, kind of have to worry about that, because he's been hitting lefties a lot better this year. Now, again, kind of like Gary said earlier, where I mentioned the offense was a lot better. Because I'm saying he's hitting lefties a lot better does not mean that he's doing it at like a all-star clip against left-handers. He's doing it a lot better, but that's also comparing it to the fact that he was absolutely horrible against them earlier in the year. And I think it's just nice to see, because then if you go into next season, he'll be able to have that center field spot secure, and he can learn through it throughout the offseason. He can have a healthy offseason, which I think is a massive thing for him, is to have a healthy offseason coming off of his first full season. And I really think that Oneil Cruz, and we've said this before, I think he has the potential, even with Brian Reynolds on this team, to be the best hitter on this team going into next season if he can continue to take those steps forward. And I don't think that's as much of a stretch as it otherwise would have been even a couple of months ago to say something like that.
Yeah, and I think fans were loath to really understand exactly what they were expecting out of him this year,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to see it again with Andy Rodriguez next year. It takes a long time after you take a year off to come back and like jump right back in, like how to hit everything again, and like you haven't struggled with a damn thing. I mean, like, Oneil Cruz is doing things right now that he started to show us towards the end of 2022 and missed all of last year. I feel like right now he's right this second back to where he was like at the end of 2022. And if he can stay healthy this year, I fully expect him to come back and contribute a heck of a lot more next year. Also seen him go into these like non-home run droughts every once in a while where and they always tend to be when he's hitting the ball the hardest around the baseball park, because he's just hitting line drives all over the place. There is a place for that. And I don't need him to hit home runs to be productive. I need him to just get on base and keep hitting the ball hard around the baseball field. Let's just not get hung up on those home runs. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, with those exit velocities, I believe it was the Friday game where he had, or actually it was the Wednesday game against the Cubs, or it was some game he had this past week where he was 4 for 4 and his average exit velocity was like 106. Like, eventually he's going to get one over the wall with an exit velocity like that. It's just going to happen.
I just feel like because we keep mentioning that, people need to understand we're not saying like exit velocity makes him a great hitter and that's all there is to it and we don't care about the results. It isn't like that. The reason exit velocity comes up isn't because everybody's a bunch of nerds and they think that is super, super important. Exit velocity comes up because the harder you hit the ball, the more often it is factually that you're going to get base hits. That's it.
Yeah.
So when he's averaging a high exit velocity, it simply tells us, regardless of result, he should be getting more hits. That's what you want to have happen, regardless of the result. That's it. That's all anybody brings it up for. It doesn't mean like we're claiming false victory or something. Like,
yeah.
People just need to chill about that.
Well, and you have Cincinnati fans that talk about it a lot as well with Ellie De La Cruz, and a lot of people kind of just make fun about it, but also that's why Ellie is one of the more electric players in all of baseball, because he can have those high exit velocities. And if you want to, I mean, after you listen to us say this, StatCast has like correlations with this stuff. Like, they'll show you a certain exit velocity off the bat will more than likely result in a hit than a lower exit velocity will. It's just something that it's like one of those direct correlations. We all learned that in high school and or whatever math class it was, about direct correlations between things. And that's what that is. And, is it overblown sometimes? Yes. It's like, okay, we get it. He's hitting the ball hard. Great. Let's just make sure that that's leading to base hits as well. Like, it is fun to talk about, but there are times where I think it's a little bit too much in terms of being overblown. But Oneil Cruz, I think, overwhelmingly has to be the best good thing that happened in the month of August. And we'll discuss a little bit more about that as well in the final part of today's show, as well as what me and Gary expect to see in the final month of the season, which, wow, it's the final month of the season already. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I had the wrong ad right up there, but Game Time, you can download that today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, because Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And, when you go through these things, all you have to do is go look and say, hey, if you wanted to be a Pirates fan and go to Chicago tonight, you can get tickets on Game Time very easily, because you can find super deals, the lowest price guarantee, and you can toggle all-in pricing that shows your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. The Game Time ticket coverage is also one of the best in the customer service policy industry as far as ticketing is concerned. So all you have to do with Game Time is take the guesswork out of buying tickets and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And folks, make sure you find all of your Pirates games on the SiriusXM app. Just search Pirates to listen to the Pittsburgh Pirates on the radio, on the go. and they have one more month to go here. 10 games under 500. So I think at this point, you're more looking at how this is all going to build in the next season. And I think that a lot of that statement from me comes from this team is going to look very familiar next year to what it currently looks like right now, with the exception of a lot of, like, the 1-year deal guys probably gone. Like Michael A. Taylor will probably be gone. Yasmani Grandal will probably be gone. Then you have the conversation that me and Gary had last week about Rowdy Tellez and Aroldis Chapman. We don't know what's going to happen there yet. But you look around the diamond and you look around this roster, Gary, and it's hard not to find guys that are going to be real contributors here next year. You're looking at Skeens. You look at Jared Jones, Mitch Keller, Nick Gonzalez, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Brian De La Cruz, Oneil Cruz, Brian Reynolds. There's a lot here already. So do you almost kind of hope, well, we are going to hope this, you kind of hope that they have a strong ending to the season like they did last year, which we all kind of got really happy about because we said, oh, this will build momentum into the next season. I think that plays the same exact way here. If they can have a strong ending to the campaign with a lot of the guys coming back, I think that is of the utmost importance this month. And when I say that, I'm talking about wins and losses. I'm not talking about other things. I'm like, hey, let's get to a certain win total and have some momentum going into next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we look for making some decisions on some guys. Some of them are going to be forced. Some of them aren't. Like Billy Cook and Nick York both need protected from the Rule 5 draft. They both will be protected from the Rule 5 draft. So when you talk about potentially calling up some young hitters, those two would be very much so on the list because you're going to protect them anyway. So why wait for December? You might go ahead and do it. Now, does it mean I think they're ready to come up here and contribute? Do they have a really good spot right now? Is there a great place to stick them? Are they ready? I don't know any of that. I can just tell you they're going to get protected so that you should be on the lookout to see them at some point. This move with Oneil Cruz, I think, opens a door for Liover Peguero. I don't think he's done anything super spectacular in the minors, but he has been on the 40-man for 3 years. He's 23 years old. Let's just say you don't get carried on the 40-man for 4 years without impacting the major league roster.
Yeah.
So there will be a decision coming at some point with him. And I would think if I'm them, I probably want to use this last month to see a lot more of him playing shortstop and seeing what he can do, moving Isaiah Kiner-Falefa over to third base and realizing that we've probably seen enough of Jared Triolo this year. I'm not saying you have to cut him, but he's gotten himself a good long chance.
Yes,
you want to keep him on the bench? Fine. Swap Peguero for Alika Williams and get him back up here and see what he can do. As far as the pitchers go, Bubba Chandler everybody wants, and everybody wants to see Thomas Harrington. Neither of them need protected on the 40-man roster. So at best, you'd be getting them a little taste up here. And then next year, you've already started their clock, dummy. So now it's not a nice to have if they surprise in spring. Now it's they're on the roster. They should make the team. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that artificially. You don't need to do that artificially. That's just a waste of roster space right now. Let them win in spring and then make an adjustment like you did with Jared Jones. As far as Ashcraft, he's injured. I'm not going to see that. Mike Burrows is a possibility.
Would like to see Mike Burrows again. Mike is one of those guys I remember having on the show, and then he sadly had that injury that sidelined him for pretty much a calendar year. And before that injury, he started kind of looking like a guy that was going to figure it out relatively quickly. His stuff is good. This is a guy that truthfully I think could be a great back end of the rotation piece that a lot of people kind of just forgot about now that they have Paul Skeens and Jared Jones and Bubba Chandler and all these big names they hear. But rarely with these pitchers especially, and Gary, you would say this a million times over, it's great to say these names. It's great to talk about these guys, But realistically, you're happy if one or two of them pan out to be a real, like, legit starter. And that's even a stretch in this day and age sometimes. So not all of these guys are guaranteed to be very good players. Like Liover Peguero, I agree with you 100%. Why not use this last month to figure out what you want to do with him? Is he a guy that you want to keep around? Is he a guy you want to use as trade bait for something you could probably get in the offseason? Or is he just a guy that you just don't think can fit? I mean, these are all questions that you'd love to answer. And I think going into the offseason, you're going to obviously have questions. There's always going to be questions. But I don't understand the point of creating more questions. Like Liover Peguero would just create another question that you then have to answer for yourself as a front office when you could kind of answer it over this last month, because a month sample size doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. I mean, look at what Jared Triolo's gotten this year. He's gotten a massive sample size. G1 Bay, not as big as Triolo, but he's got a pretty substantial sample size now where you can kind of really start making a decision on these guys. And Peguero just hasn't. I mean, he really hasn't at all. And I think that he deserves it. As you mentioned, he hasn't really done anything crazy in the minor leagues, but I would argue that he hasn't done anything bad enough to not get the opportunity. And it's very rare you see a guy on the 40-man this long without really getting somewhat of a shot. And I just don't really
is. He was one of those guys, though, that got acquired when he was so young, and he was already there because he was an international pickup. So, you have to protect him super early, way before he's ready. And it's the same reason that they just traded that Peralta pitcher for Beeks, because he had just hit AA. They were going to have to protect him. They didn't think he was going to factor in right away. I could tell you I think that's stupid because I watched him and I thought he was probably ready to make the jump from AA and contribute to the bullpen. But those are the kind of decisions that come up when you start running into Rule 5. G1 Bay, I'm glad you brought him up because he's the same type of situation as Liover Peguero. You need those spots. Guess where they're coming from? You better be sure. There ain't no way to be sure unless you get him up here. And Liover Peguero is a guy that, honestly, I think the better the pitching gets, the better he'll get. I think he has a really hard time laying off some of the crap he sees in AAA. And he's constantly trying to do something with the bat, reaching for things that he probably wouldn't have to in the majors.
Yeah. Well, we remember last year, too, with Peguero, a lot of people remember his power element kind of came out of nowhere last year when he was here. And I kind of felt bad because I wanted to see more of it. I wanted to see if it was a consistent thing for him that he could be a 15 or 10 to 15 home run guy. But again, you can't see it unless he's here. And I think as far as those expectations are concerned, I think me and Gary kind of agree. We just want to see some question marks get somewhat of an answer. And also when these decisions come around, they could say they did their due diligence, whatever their due diligence is to them. But that's more of where I am, is it's like, hey, when you have to put Cook and York on here, and if you cut Peguero without giving him a chance or trade him, I'm going to be like, well, this is kind of weird because you didn't give the guy a chance at all. And those are the kind of decisions that we might see this offseason. The next time we roll around with a recap, it'll be an October one as well as my season recap. That'll all be at the end of this month. But throughout the rest of this week, we have episode 795 today through 799 Friday. And then, of course, episode 800 next week. So make sure you guys are there for that. Gary, you have 5 Thoughts at 5 coming out on Steel City Pirates, amongst a plentiful amount of other things. Any guest on the fan forum this Thursday for you? You and Jim just kind of running solo this week.
I'm again, like last week, I have some irons in the fire. Last week it turned out to be Eric. We'll see. I'll find somebody.
Well, there you go, guys. Be on the lookout for all of Gary's content, and be on the lookout for Locked On Pirates, where you can find this show on all of your audio platforms and YouTube. It's free, so subscribe to it. Thank you so much for tuning in, as you always do. Have a wonderful rest of your Labor Day. Enjoy the long weekend as it comes to a close. And until tomorrow, see you on the flip side.